The night of January 16th, 1984 seemed like any other for the Bennett family in Aurora, Colorado. They had just celebrated their daughter Melissa's upcoming 8th birthday with family and friends. The house was full of laughter and warmth. As the evening ended, Bruce and Deborah Bennett put their daughters, Melissa and 3-year-old Vanessa, to bed, not knowing that their peaceful home was about to be shattered by a terrible act of violence. Bruce and Deborah Bennett married in the 1970s, brimming with hopes and dreams for their future together. Nearing their 20s, the young couple looked forward to building a life side by side. Bruce, born on April 22, 1956, in Denver, Colorado, had an unremarkable childhood as suggested by later accounts, with 2 brothers named Richard and Daniel. Deborah was the eldest of 4 siblings, children of war veteran Ernest Large and his wife, Rosina Martinez. Tragically, Deborah lost her mother at a young age, forcing her to take on the responsibility of caring for her younger siblings alongside her father. The family eventually relocated to Colorado, where Larry, one of Deborah's brothers, met Bruce, leading to a friendship that ultimately brought Bruce and Deborah together. The pair soon fell in love and decided to start a family. To support his new family, Bruce enlisted in the Navy, serving as a sonar analyst stationed at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. This job allowed him to work with advanced technology, providing a stable income. During his service, their first daughter, Melissa Bennett, was born in January 1976. Their second daughter, Vanessa, arrived in 1981. After completing his military service, Bruce had succeeded in securing a better financial standing for his family. They settled in Aurora, Colorado, and in 1983 they used their savings and a loan to purchase their first home. Bruce and Deborah joined the family's furniture distribution business, while Bruce also pursued studies to become an air traffic controller. The Bennett family led a quiet life, enjoying their time with their 2 young daughters. However, their peaceful existence was shattered in early 1984. On Sunday, January 15, 1984, the Bennetts hosted a family gathering to celebrate Melissa's upcoming 8th birthday. Deborah had planned a party at school for her daughter, but the family also gathered at the Bennett home for a pre-birthday celebration. The day was filled with laughter, conversation, and a delicious cake. As the evening wound down, Melissa's grandparents and uncles left for their homes. One of the uncles noticed the garage door was open and reminded Bruce to close it, unaware it would be the last time he would see Bruce alive. The next morning, on January 16, 1984, Bruce's mother, Constance Bennett, known as Connie, received a call from the family furniture store. Bruce and Deborah had not shown up for work, and no one was answering the phone at their house. Concerned, Connie decided to check on them. When she arrived at the Bennett home, the garage door was still open. Entering the house, she was met with a horrifying sight. Bruce lay at the foot of the stairs in a pool of blood with severe head trauma and a deep cut across his throat. Shocked and terrified, Connie ran to a neighbor for help. They called 911 and soon, police and medical personnel were on the scene. Inside the house, police discovered Deborah's body in the master bedroom, her head brutally beaten. In the children's room, they found Melissa, also beaten and stabbed, her face covered with a blanket and showing signs of sexual assault. Miraculously, little Vanessa, despite her severe injuries, was still alive. Emergency responders rushed her to the hospital, where her life hung by a thread. With Vanessa on the way to the hospital and the bodies of her family members removed, investigators began meticulously examining the Bennett home for clues. They found Deborah's purse outside in the snow, rifled through, likely by the attackers. Nearby, a butcher knife belonging to the Bennetts was discovered, believed to be one of the weapons used in the attacks. While the murder weapon used for the fatal blows was never found, investigators suspected it might have been a hammer, based on the injuries and a blood-stained outline found on a carpet. They collected fingerprints and other samples from various surfaces, hoping to find traces that would lead them to the perpetrator. They also noted blood-stained boot prints that the family did not recognize. Family members and close friends who had attended Melissa's birthday party that Sunday were also asked to provide DNA samples. Authorities took these measures, hoping that in the future they could be used for genetic studies, which were in their early stages at that time. Specialists carefully preserved the victim's clothing and, upon thorough examination, collected parts of the carpet beneath Melissa's body, as well as a bedspread and other items. Meanwhile, a team of healthcare professionals fought to keep Vanessa alive. The 3-year-old needed 3 units of blood and several units of fluids for the treatment of her numerous injuries. The doctor's report to the family was devastating. Vanessa had a shattered jaw, severe head injuries and broken arms, hips, and legs. She had also been sexually assaulted. As days passed, investigators realized that the Bennett family attack was not an isolated incident. Less than 2 weeks before the brutal assault on the Bennetts, several similar attacks had occurred in Colorado. One notable case involved the young couple James and Kimberly, who lived in the Aurora area. On the night of January 4, 1984, James and Kimberly were spending a quiet evening at home. Kimberly was in the bedroom, and James was recording music tapes for a friend. Suddenly, Kimberly was struck on the head in the dark. She managed to see the silhouette of a man who fled when she began to scream for her husband. James ran to the bedroom and was hit on the head by the hammer-wielding attacker. Despite his injury, James chased the assailant, who ultimately escaped. Kimberly, despite her severe head injury, called 911. Emergency services arrived and transported the couple to the nearest hospital. James had a skull fracture and Kimberly had a concussion, but both recovered. The police found the hammer used in the attack. They concluded that the assailant had entered through the garage, whose door was open. Fresh footprints in the snow led away from the house but eventually mixed with other tracks, and the trail was lost. They also found Kimberly's purse in the snow, missing only the money. Less than a week later, another violent incident shocked the Colorado community. Patricia Smith, a 50-year-old woman, had recently moved to Colorado from Nebraska to help her newly divorced daughter settle into a new home with her 2 young children. Patricia was a well-known interior decorator with a prestigious client list, known for her kindness, elegance, and activity. On Tuesday, January 10th, Patricia started her day by taking her daughter to a park to catch the bus to work, and then dropped off her grandchildren at daycare. She spent the rest of the morning working, picked up laundry at noon, and bought a hamburger for lunch. Arriving home, she went to her room, turned on the TV, and then apparently returned downstairs. Near the front door, she encountered an intruder in the living room. She had no time to react before a flurry of blows ended her life. That evening, around 5:30, her daughter was waiting at the park for her mother to pick her up. When Patricia did not arrive as usual, she called home from a public phone, but no one answered. Concerned, she called a cousin who picked her up along with the children and took them home. Upon arrival, they noticed the garage door open, and inside the darkened house, a flickering light from the TV upstairs. She found her mother's body on the floor, covered with a child's blanket with obvious signs of bleeding. Patricia's pants and boots were scattered around and her upper clothing was open, indicating another brutal assault. Beside her lay a hammer. Unable to believe what she was seeing, the terrified daughter ran to a neighbor's house, asking for help to confirm if her mother was still alive. Unfortunately, she was not. They immediately called 911. After Patricia's body was taken to the morgue for examination, the autopsy revealed 17 head injuries and confirmed sexual assault. Investigators deduced that after killing Patricia, the attacker went upstairs, stole money from her purse, and then fled. The investigation extended to Patricia's close acquaintances, including clients with whom she had had disagreements, but no leads emerged. That same day, January 10th, another young woman was attacked. Her name was Donna. She was a flight attendant for Frontier Airlines and her partner, Ron, was a pilot. That evening, Donna was off duty and awaiting Ron's return from a night flight. After shopping for groceries, she collected the mail and parked her car in the garage. As she exited her vehicle, she was struck on the temple and lost consciousness. The following morning, Ron returned home to find a red trail from the garage to the house. He rushed inside and followed the trail to the bedroom, where he found Donna lying on the bed with a head wound. Somehow, Donna had managed to make it to the bedroom. Ron called 911 immediately. Paramedics arrived and rushed Donna to the hospital, where she received treatment. Doctors confirmed she had been sexually assaulted. Initially, Ron was considered a suspect, but he had just landed in Colorado, and Donna's attack had occurred hours earlier. Investigators found a hammer covered in blood in the driver's seat of Donna's car. They collected it as evidence but found no useful fingerprints. Despite her severe injuries, Donna recovered, though the head injury left her with significant short-term memory loss, unable to recall the night of the attack. This lack of memory was, in some ways, a blessing to Donna, who was grateful to have survived. 6 days later, less than 25 miles from Donna and Ron's home, the horrific attack on the Bennett family occurred. Throughout that tragic January, while the families of the deceased mourned their losses, those who survived, like little Vanessa, continued their recovery. The Bennett family, especially Vanessa's grandmother Connie, held out hope for the child's recovery. The investigation stretched on. Investigators collected all possible evidence from the 4 crime scenes, including genetic material, footprints, and other clues. However, in the 1980s, forensic technology was far less advanced than today, and DNA analysis was just beginning. The attacks occurred in both Aurora and Lakewood, leading local police to share information. Unfortunately, no useful fingerprints were found at the crime scenes or on the hammers used in the attacks. The FBI was brought in, and a profiler studied the case, concluding that the attacker was likely an opportunistic rather than a predator. He did not target specific victims but seemed to roam neighborhoods looking for easy access, such as open garage doors. Once inside, his attacks were swift, violent, and fatal, followed by sexual assault and theft of money only. The profiler estimated that the perpetrator was a young man around 20 years old, intelligent but not highly educated, possibly a high school graduate but not a college student. The repeated use of hammers and a rugged boot print found at one scene suggested he worked in construction. At the time, numerous homes were being built in the areas where the crimes occurred. Most worryingly, the profiler asserted that this man would continue attacking until he was caught. Using this profile, investigators visited construction sites, talking to contractors and seeking information about any unusual behavior among workers. However, contractor records were not thorough and no useful descriptions of the attacker were available since all assaults were sudden and occurred in darkness. While the investigation continued without new leads, the community was gripped by fear. Residents became vigilant about locking their garages and doors, with some buying guns or even wearing helmets to bed. Time passed without further attacks, and the police were forced to move on to new cases, leaving these brutal crimes unresolved. Survivors of the assaults were recovering and trying to move past the trauma of their harrowing experiences, while the families of the victims continued to grapple with the pain of their loss. Periodically, the original investigators of the attacks, along with those who replaced them, would contact specialized departments and laboratories, hoping that advances in DNA technology might finally identify the perpetrator. In 1990, Aurora police sent samples from a bedspread, a carpet, and other items collected from the Bennett crime scene to a forensic examiner in Richmond, California. Unfortunately, no significant progress was made at the time. During a new review of the evidence, investigators found a blonde pubic hair and sent it for specialized analysis. However, due to the primitive technology of the time, the test destroyed this single hair without yielding any results. It wasn't until 2001, 17 years after the attacks, that full identification of the DNA samples was achieved, ruling out family members as potential suspects. It took another 3 years to definitively link the family case with Patricia's case, as the same DNA was found in samples from both crime scenes. Yet, the DNA belonged to an unknown individual, and finding a match in existing databases was challenging. Genetic databases across the U.S. were still in their infancy, with each state and agency having its own rules. In 2018, in another attempt to solve the cases, detectives teamed up with a genealogist. She used the sequenced DNA and began searching public and private databases. Within a week, she informed the detectives that the DNA belonged to someone with the last name Ewing. This was a significant breakthrough. Police found 3 or 4 in Colorado with the last name Ewing, but they were all ruled out as suspects. Further searches in Aurora's databases revealed 40 individuals with the surname Ewing. Investigators began analyzing each one while handling other cases. Finally, in July 2018, they discovered a match with an inmate in Nevada. The man, Alex Ewing. He was born on August 14, 1960, in North Carolina. Little is known about his childhood, and he never spoke about it, but it is known that he dropped out of school after the 10th grade. He claimed he was expelled for frequently getting drunk. This was the beginning of a life of crime. Alex was detained for 2 months in a juvenile center in Sacramento, California, for theft. He was later sent to a foster home, where he stayed for 2 weeks before being released. He then embarked on a criminal career, being arrested multiple times in California, Arizona, and Florida for theft, burglary, and escape. According to a driver's license he obtained in 1983, Alex was living in Denver, Colorado. The attacks occurred in early 1984, leaving 4 injured and 4 dead over 12 days. The assault stopped when Alex left Colorado, moving to Kingman, Arizona a few days later. There, on January 27, 1984, he broke into a home and attacked Roy Williams with a granite rock, hitting him in the head and chest. Roy survived, requiring 100 stitches. He gave a partial description of his attacker. Later that day, a police officer spotted a man matching the description hiding in bushes near an interstate on-ramp. The officer approached, and Alex fled. After a chase, Alex was apprehended. On February 2, 1984, Alex was formally charged with attempted first-degree murder and first-degree robbery and held in jail in Utah. In early August 1984, Alex and several inmates were transported from jail for a court hearing. During a stop at a service station, he escaped. Wearing red shorts and an orange jumpsuit, he ran and disappeared. At 10 p.m., police received calls about a suspicious man in red shorts running through a neighborhood. An hour later, Nancy Berry called 911 in a panic, saying she and her husband had been attacked. Nancy and her husband Chris were found severely injured in their bed. Alex had broken in through their open garage door and attacked them with an axe handle. Fortunately, their children were unharmed. A massive manhunt ensued, but Alex remained elusive. 4 days later, he was spotted at a phone booth, apparently calling his brother for help. He tried to flee, but, weakened and dehydrated, was captured. Back in custody, Alex faced trial and was charged with attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, robbery, and escape. He was sentenced to 110 years in prison. Meanwhile, he had been at large for less than 8 months after the Colorado attacks. In July 2018, a team of Colorado police and prosecutors traveled to the Northern Nevada Correctional Center to interview Alex. Initially posing as non-law enforcement, they did not mention the Colorado crimes. However, with the breakthrough in DNA technology and genealogy research, they finally had the evidence needed to connect Alex Ewing to the heinous crimes that had haunted Colorado for over 3 decades. In this conversation, Alex recounted that his father was in the Air Force and discussed his abandonment of school, claiming he had suffered from spinal meningitis, which led to a near-death experience and a change in his behavior. He also mentioned that, before arriving in Nevada, he had spent an unspecified time in Colorado, working in construction in Aurora and Lakewood. He said he left because it was too cold. This information confirmed Alex's presence in Colorado. The next day, a detective returned to meet with him, showing 6 black-and-white photographs of the crimes in that state. Initially, Alex denied knowing any of the victims. However, when shown a color photo of Patricia alive, he still claimed not to know her. But upon seeing a color image of her body, he became visibly agitated, insisted there must be a mistake, and immediately requested a lawyer. Alex had not anticipated this turn of events. After 34 years in prison, he was preparing documents to request parole, which he could do after serving 40 years. Confident in his release, he even created a profile on a dating site. Following this meeting, Colorado detectives obtained a court order to collect an additional cheek swab from Alex. The DNA results confirmed a match with samples from the Bennett and Patricia crime scenes. With this confirmation, police began notifying the families and survivors of the 1984 attacks, informing them they had finally found the perpetrator. However, justice would still take time. The first step was to request Alex's extradition from Nevada to Colorado for trial. The first extradition hearing took place on October 2, 2018. Alex informed the judge he planned to fight the extradition, and over the next 16 months, his lawyer filed appeals at every possible level. Meanwhile, Colorado prosecutors were considering their options. Unfortunately, for cases without fatalities, prosecution was impossible due to a 3-year statute of limitations. However, Alex could be tried for the fatal attacks, which meant he would be prosecuted for the deaths of the 3 Bennett family members and Patricia under Colorado's 1984 laws. At the time of the crimes, the maximum penalty was life without parole, as the death penalty was not applicable. On February 21, 2020, the Nevada Supreme Court ordered Alex's transfer to Colorado to face charges. His lawyer made an emergency appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, but it was declined. On February 28, 2020, Alex was flown to Colorado, and 2 days later he appeared in court for his first hearing. The trial for the Bennett family case began on July 27, 2021. The prosecution's case centered on Alex's confirmed DNA presence in semen traces found near Melissa's body. They highlighted the similarities in modus operandi, comparing it to the fatal attack on Patricia. Both cases involved brutal hammer attacks, sexual assault, and the bodies being left partially naked with faces covered. The attacker had entered through open garages, and the women's purses were found ransacked nearby. The defense attempted to undermine the investigators' professionalism, claiming mishandling of DNA samples and noting the absence of fingerprints or touch DNA at the crime scenes. The prosecution countered that Alex could have worn gloves. The jury heard from police, firefighters, investigators, and specialists. The most impactful testimony came from Connie Bennett, Bruce's mother, who described finding the horrific crime scene at her son's home. The jury also saw photographs taken at the Bennett residence. After deliberating for only 3.5 hours, the jury sent a note to the judge, stating they were deadlocked. The prosecutor requested the judge instruct the jury to continue deliberations, while the defense sought a mistrial. The judge decided it was too soon for a mistrial and asked the jury to return the next day. After 6 more hours of discussion, the jury found Alex Ewing guilty of the charges, including 3 counts of murder, robbery, and other offenses. On August 2021, before sentencing, family members, including Connie and Vanessa, the only survivor, gave impact statements. When asked if he had anything to say, Alex simply replied, "No, thank you." The judge harshly criticized Alex, stating that in all his years in the justice system, he had never encountered such depravity. He ensured Alex would never be free again, sentencing him to 3 consecutive life sentences, preventing the possibility of parole after 20 years. In October 2021, the trial for Patricia Smith's case began, but was declared a mistrial after Alex's defense requested a competency hearing to evaluate his mental state. The competency evaluation concluded that Alex was indeed mentally fit to stand trial. After delays, the trial finally took place in early April 2022. Unlike the first trial, Alex spoke up, complaining about his extradition from Nevada, accusing the system of being rigged, and alleging that authorities had ignored his efforts to lead them to the real criminals. Despite his arguments, the result was another life sentence, adding to the 3 he already had. Unfortunately, nothing could change the past. During the trial, Vanessa, the only survivor of the Bennett family, was present. Many might wonder what became of her after the tragedy. Vanessa shared her story in interviews with several media outlets describing a difficult life. Vanessa recounted that the brutal attack left her with severe physical and mental scars. After waking from a coma weeks after the assault, she had to relearn how to walk and do everything again. She mentioned having permanent physical injuries, including partial paralysis on her left side, making it hard for her to grip or release objects. However, the mental scars were even more profound. After being discharged from the hospital, Vanessa spent 2 months in a center for abused children before moving in with her grandmother. Filled with rage, she struggled at school where children mocked her, exacerbating her anger. She became rebellious, and her grandmother eventually enrolled her in a boarding school. During her first summer back home, she attempted suicide. Fortunately, the family intervened in time, and after recovery, she was sent to a psychiatric ward and then to a group home until she turned 18. At 18, Vanessa became pregnant, and social services took her child, as she admitted she did not know how to be a mother. Later, she had two more daughters who were placed in the care of a cousin, and she was not allowed to see or know their whereabouts. Vanessa developed borderline personality disorder, PTSD, bipolar disorder, and ADHD. Her fragmented memories of her family and life before the attack, coupled with severe mental instability and a drug addiction that began at 19, took a toll on her psyche. Vanessa explained that she used drugs to escape the world and forget everything, but this path led her to jail multiple times for shoplifting, assault, domestic violence, burglary, and drug possession. She lived homeless for a long time, residing under a bridge with a partner. This was her situation when she learned that her attacker had been caught. Despite the hardships, Vanessa found a ray of hope. By the age of 30, she decided to stop being a victim and dedicated herself to staying clean. She lived in an apartment with her second husband and had a cat. Vanessa aspired to obtain a university degree to become a counselor and help those struggling with substance abuse. When asked if she felt relieved when Alex was finally identified and punished, Vanessa said no. She expressed that while catching the killer might make others feel better, it meant nothing to her. The damage had already been done. Her life was ruined. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. On Saturday morning, August 19, 2017, Norberta Graywin watched her 22-year-old pregnant daughter, Savannah, struggle to climb the stairs to her third-floor neighbor's apartment. Savannah was 8 months pregnant, and the unusually hot August weather made it difficult for her to walk on her swollen legs. A few hours later, William Hone, the boyfriend of Brooke Cruz, the same neighbor who had invited Savannah over, climbed those same stairs. When he entered the apartment, he found Brooke scrubbing the bathroom, with Savannah's bloody and shredded body lying on the floor and a basin with a baby on top of the toilet lid. Seeing William, Brooke picked up the infant and handed it to him, saying, "This is our baby. This is our family. Please help me." In a shocking twist against any sense of morality, William assisted Brooke in cleaning up the blood, carrying bags of bloody towels and clothes out of the apartment, wrapping Savannah's body in bags secured with duct tape and ropes, and later disposing of the corpse. This heinous crime would soon send shockwaves across the entire nation. Savannah Graywin was born on August 9, 1995, in Belcourt, North Dakota. Her parents, Norberta and Joe Graywin, were Native Americans. She was a member of the Spirit Lake Sioux tribe. Shortly after Savannah's birth, the family moved to Fargo, but they returned to the reservation when she was 9 years old. Growing up in a vibrant, multicultural community, rich with colorful traditions, Savannah was immersed in nature and surrounded by the love of her family, which she valued above all else. This circle also included her grandparents and 3 siblings. Savannah was a horse enthusiast with a caring soul and was known as a committed student with average performance at Warwick Public High School. It was during her studies there that she met Ashton Matheny, who, like her, was a member of the Spirit Lake Sioux tribe. Their romance quickly blossomed, and by 2010 they were certain they had found the love of their lives. Though they dreamed of starting a home together, it was still early. However, Ashton's daily interactions with Savannah gave him a glimpse of her maternal instincts, as she adored children, particularly her nephews, whom she helped raise with great joy. Later, Savannah attended the Lakes Region State College and earned a degree as a certified nursing assistant, which led to employment at a senior care home. When the home was acquired by a large American company, she was transferred to Fargo in January 2016. To keep Savannah company, her entire family moved to Fargo, renting a modest ground-floor apartment. At that time, Ashton lived and worked in Minneapolis, about 270 miles away, making efforts to visit her regularly. During these visits, they discussed saving money to eventually move in together. In the apartment above Savannah's lived the couple Brooke and William. Brooke, born on July 4, 1979, had a troubled past despite growing up in a normal family in Florida. She was always a problematic young woman, and her relationships over the last 2 decades showed she was obsessive, had poorly controlled aggression, and a knack for intimidating people. At 17, in 1995, Brooke gave birth to a daughter from her relationship with Aaron Edwards. After becoming a mother, she worked as a pet store animal technician and a sales representative. However, one day she left the state without explanation, abandoning her husband and daughter. She then led a life on the fringes of the law, ending up imprisoned in Missouri for passing bad checks, and later in Texas for violating parole while working as a waitress in a Chinese restaurant. When her daughter turned 14, Brooke had some virtual conversations with her through a social network, maintaining brief contact, always behind Aaron's back, who hadn't heard from his ex-wife since she left. Throughout those years, Brooke had numerous lovers, which she boasted about until she remarried in 2006, this time to Carl Cruz, a carpenter from Minnesota. The couple had 2 children, and Brooke worked as Carl's administrative assistant. After 3 years, Brooke left for a period, and upon her return, Carl discovered she kept meticulous records and diaries detailing rather peculiar matters. The most shocking entries included detailed accounts of her various lovers and, more disturbingly, comprehensive reports on births and pregnancy terminations. Brooke kept meticulous notes that included a list of items needed to dispose of an unborn child: scissors, knives, tweezers, gloves, and oxytocin to induce contractions or cause a miscarriage. In 2010 and 2011, Brooke visited Australia, and during one of these trips, she suffered a spontaneous miscarriage. Doctors informed her that she could no longer have children. At the end of that year and the beginning of the next, Brooke was arrested for attacking her husband Carl with a knife. After regaining her freedom, she traveled back to Australia using a false identity. In a sworn statement during a custody battle for their 2 children, Carl wrote that she often fled from her problems, citing her trips to Australia as an example. Living life on her terms, Brooke met Andrew Murray, a chef from Katoomba, through a dating app. She quickly moved to the Blue Mountains and married him. However, Andrew soon discovered the countless lies surrounding his new wife, who had concealed her true identity, the fact that she had children and that she had been previously married. Despite her deceit, Andrew fell in love and decided to salvage their relationship. He stood by Brooke's side but soon grew uneasy about her obsession with real-life crimes. Brooke's fixation on criminal psychology and famous criminals became her sole reading material and favorite conversation topic. Initially, Andrew saw it as a peculiar but harmless hobby, but his perspective shifted when she began threatening him. Andrew became alarmed as her behavior grew increasingly aggressive. He suggested she return to the United States to care for her children, but this only worsened the situation. Brooke threatened to report him to the authorities and attempted to terrorize him, making him believe the police were after him. Exhausted by her delusions, Andrew went to the nearest police station, offering to cooperate with the authorities, as he had nothing to hide. The officers informed him there were no charges against him and suggested something was wrong with his wife. Andrew recounted the torment he endured, including threatening texts and immigration documents with false names. 6 months and 10 days passed from Brooke's arrival in Australia until her return to the United States in October 2012. Back in the U.S., Andrew maintained contact with Brooke for 2 weeks, contemplating a move to reconcile their marriage. However, he soon realized it was futile. Concerned by her erratic behavior, he alerted the Fargo police about the potential danger she posed. However, the police seemed indifferent to his warnings. Eventually, Andrew severed ties with Brooke and moved on. Back in the U.S., Brooke engaged in a prolonged custody battle with Carl for their 2 children. Around the same time, in late 2012, she began a relationship with William, a few years younger than her. Details about William's background are sparse, but it is known that he had recently completed a sentence for child neglect and abuse after bringing his son to the hospital in January 2011 with fractures near his right ear. The whirlwind romance led Brooke and William to move into an apartment in the same Fargo building where Savannah's family lived. William, blinded by what he believed to be an unbreakable love, dreamed of building a home and family with Brooke. Although Brooke initially reciprocated William's feelings, she hid her significant difficulties in conceiving. Meanwhile, Brooke faced the frustration of the court granting exclusive custody of her 2 children to her ex-husband Carl, while she only had visitation rights. Brooke made a living through temporary jobs, either in stores or various nursing homes. Over the months, her feelings toward William changed, as reflected in her diary. On December 23, 2014, she was diagnosed with anxiety at a Fargo medical center and was told she had post-traumatic stress disorder. To make matters worse, the following year, Brooke received a medical report about a growth in her gallbladder, darkening her mood even further. By that time, she wrote in her personal notes about a shadow that seemed to be consuming her true personality. Throughout that year and the next 2, their relationship oscillated between routine calm and occasional conflicts. Given the tragic events that later unfolded, investigators believe Brooke was likely seeking a solution to fulfill her desire to be a mother again and to prevent William from leaving her. While Brooke's life seemed to be spiraling into chaos, Savannah and her boyfriend Ashton's relationship appeared increasingly promising. At the beginning of 2017, they received the wonderful news that they were expecting their first child. The family's jubilant reaction to the news only heightened the couple's excitement for their bright future. Ashton doubled his efforts to achieve their long-awaited independence and marriage. In the fall of 2017, the doctor informed them they would have a girl, filling them with joy. Around that time, their upstairs neighbor, with whom Savannah's family had only a courteous relationship, approached the pregnant young woman with an invitation to smoke an illegal substance. Savannah refused and immediately informed her family about the absurd proposal, especially given her advanced pregnancy. From that moment, Norberta and Joe, Savannah's parents, viewed Brooke and her boyfriend William with suspicion. Saturday, August 19th, 2017, began like any other day. At 22 and in her 8th month of pregnancy, Savannah looked radiant but understandably tired. She eagerly awaited her baby's due date. Shortly after noon, Brooke called Savannah to her apartment for help with sewing, explaining she needed her to try on a dress. Despite her distrust, Savannah agreed to help. Once inside, Brooke became hostile, accusing Savannah of mistreating her cats. At 1:30 p.m., Ashton sent a message to Savannah, which went unanswered. Suddenly, the two women engaged in a physical fight and Savannah fell, hitting her head. The impact left her unconscious and Brooke took the opportunity to fetch a knife. Using the sharp object, Brooke performed a cesarean section without medical knowledge, driven by her desire to steal the baby. In excruciating pain, Savannah tried to rise and saw in horror as Brooke removed her baby and placed her in a bathtub. Without proper medical attention, Savannah was severely weakened from profuse bleeding, and soon after, her heart stopped. Worried for his daughter and suspicious of the strange neighbor, Joe knocked on Brooke's door but received evasive responses. The details of William's involvement in the crime vary, with investigators debating two scenarios. In the first, William arrived after Savannah's tragic end. In the second, upon discovering the bloody scene, William tied a rope around Savannah's neck to ensure she had no signs of life. According to the reconstruction of events, what is certain is that Brooke showed the newborn to William, declaring they finally had a family. William then cleaned the crime scene, gathering all evidence including shoes and blood-stained towels, and disposed of them far away. The couple discarded Savannah's body in the Red River on the outskirts of Fargo, near the Minnesota border. Meanwhile, Savannah's family, desperate after countless unanswered calls to her phone, reported her disappearance that same Saturday afternoon. Officers arrived at their home at 5 p.m. and, after a brief conversation with Norberta and Joe, learned where Savannah was last seen. They immediately went upstairs and knocked on Brooke and William's door. The initial visit by the police to the apartment revealed nothing suspicious, so they left. However, a few hours later, still with no news of Savannah's whereabouts, the officers returned to Brooke and William's apartment for further questioning. Meanwhile, investigators interviewed Ashton, whose alibi was corroborated the next day. Consequently, on Sunday, August 20th, 2017, the police visited the couple's residence for the third time. Despite Brooke and William sticking to their story and no incriminating evidence being found, the officers left empty-handed once again. Ashton took matters into his own hands, dedicating every moment to informing locals about the case and asking for their help in finding Savannah. During those anguished hours, the soon-to-be father couldn't stop replaying his last conversation with his girlfriend in his mind, hoping to find a logical explanation for her mysterious disappearance. Determined to follow the only viable lead, the timeline of events, the police took William to the station for an interview. He did everything he could to handle the situation. Meanwhile, back home, both he and Brooke had to care for the newborn, which involved buying necessities for feeding and clothing her. They also began informing their acquaintances that they had become parents, news that quickly reached the investigating officers. Suspecting that Savannah might be held captive somewhere, the police started tailing the couple. Finally, on Tuesday, August 22, 2017, the police raided Brooke and William's apartment. After moving the sofa that had been placed against the door to block entry, they found a chaotic scene. On the bed, they discovered a newborn baby, just a few days old, who was immediately taken to the emergency room. Though Brooke refused to answer the police's questions, both she and William were taken to the station. There, William revealed that when he arrived home that Saturday, Brooke was holding the baby and frantically trying to clean up the scene. His disclosures began to unravel the gruesome story. On Thursday, August 24, 2017, Brooke and William were formally arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and providing false information to the police. Fortunately, the baby was in good health. Genetic tests would later provide crucial evidence against those who took Savannah's life. 3 days later, Savannah's lifeless body was found on the banks of the Red River, wrapped in plastic and adhesive tape. The subsequent autopsy revealed she had been a victim of homicidal violence, though it was unclear whether she died from blood loss or airway obstruction. Genetic tests confirmed that the baby was indeed Savannah's. The child was placed under the care of the county social services and later given the name her biological parents had chosen. Ashton shared an adorable photo of himself holding the baby on social media, a moment of overwhelming joy amidst the tragedy. A candlelight vigil in memory of Savannah was held on the evening of Wednesday, September 6, 2017. The following morning, Thursday, September 7, 2017, a funeral service took place at First Assembly Church. The funeral ceremony was open to the public, drawing nearly 1,000 mourners who joined Savannah's family and friends to pay their final respects amidst tears. Native American songs filled the air as Savannah, remembered as a kind and loving girl, was honored. The town's mayor offered words in memory of the late mother. Many attendees wore red shirts symbolizing not only Savannah's loss, but also the countless other indigenous women who had met similar fates. After the service, a horse-drawn carriage carried Savannah's casket to the cemetery, followed by 10 horses, one of which was riderless. Only Savannah's family attended the burial, placing various items on her coffin according to their tribal beliefs to accompany her on her journey to the afterlife. In later interviews, Ashton shared that he suffered from recurring nightmares following the tragic events. However, the support from friends and the community was overwhelming. One significant gesture was the creation of a fundraising account in his and his baby's names to help cover essential expenses. Granted legal custody of the baby, Ashton focused on her well-being. With the help of Savannah's parents, he spent his days bathing, feeding, and changing the baby, ensuring she had everything she needed. As he later shared with the media, Ashton realized he had become both father and mother. Brooke's trial began in early December 2017 at the Fargo courthouse. At 6 months old, Savannah's baby was seen in her father's arms during the hearings, where Ashton learned in detail the twisted circumstances of Savannah's death. The prosecutor emphasized Savannah's baby took her first breath as her mother took her last, seeking a life sentence without parole for Brooke, whom she called dangerous and heartless. Brooke's attorney requested life with the possibility of parole, arguing that in his 38-year career, he believed everyone could change, pointing to Brooke's acceptance of responsibility. In February 2018, at the sentencing hearing, moments before the judge announced the verdict, Brooke apologized to Savannah's family for the pain she had caused. She acknowledged there was no excuse or way to undo her actions. Ultimately, Brooke was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for the crime against Savannah. William, having accepted a plea deal and cooperated fully with the investigation, avoided charges of conspiracy to commit murder and to take the baby. Instead, he faced lesser charges of conspiracy to kidnap the baby and providing false information to investigators. However, the judge designated William as a particularly dangerous offender due to his prior conviction for child neglect and abuse, increasing his sentencing possibilities from 20 years to life imprisonment. During his sentencing hearing, William expressed deep remorse. However, during the victim impact statement, Savannah's mother expressed that William's supposed remorse was insufficient. She urged the judge to apply the full weight of the law, condemning Williams and his girlfriend's actions as atrocious and twisted. The judge heeded her plea, sentencing 33-year-old William to life imprisonment as a particularly dangerous offender. Despite this, he was given the possibility of parole. William later appealed his status as a particularly dangerous offender, and in August 2019, the North Dakota Supreme Court ruled that the designation was inappropriate. Consequently, a new sentencing was ordered. The second hearing took place on October 7, 2019. Although the judge disagreed with the decision, he aimed to be as severe as possible, sentencing William to 20 years in prison. Beyond the court and complex judicial processes, Savannah's loved ones strove to regain a sense of normalcy, especially because they believed that Savannah's baby deserved a full life, not one overshadowed by grief. For Ashton, every moment with his daughter was particularly precious after surviving such a nightmare. After enduring such a stressful and painful time, Ashton told the press he felt relieved that life for both of them had become much more tranquil and stable. The young father devoted himself to studying business administration at a local community college. Given their financial constraints, Ashton was looking for a better-paying job alongside his obligations. He was very grateful for the support from the fundraising account, using the money to buy a vehicle and renovate their modest home. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. October 15th, 1981. A serene evening turned into a nightmare with a violent attack. The air was thick with tension as a young life was brutally cut short. Her cries for help echoed. The woman's pantyhose were tightly wrapped around her neck, a grotesque symbol of the ferocity of the assault. She was sexually assaulted, and her struggle for life was a desperate one. Her death was agonizingly slow. In the years that followed, Sasha Stone, who lost her mother at the age of 4, embarked on a long and arduous search for answers. Sonia Carmen Hirac was born on May 27, 1951, in Quebec, eastern Canada. Little is known about her early life and home environment. The first notable events in her life trace back to her teenage years when she met David in Montreal. The two fell deeply in love, according to stories from that time. When David decided to move to California, USA in 1972, Sonia followed him. Despite her adventurous spirit, Sonia had other dreams. She longed to marry and start a family. Their differing life goals eventually led to the end of their romantic relationship, but they remained friends. A few months later, another man entered Sonia's life, Michael. Sonia's happiness on her wedding day to Michael was captured in photographs, her radiant smile reflecting her joy. Soon after, their happiness seemed complete with the birth of their first child, Sasha, in 1977. David, maintaining his close friendship with Sonia, was named Sasha's godfather. Sonia was recognized for her sewing skills and independent entrepreneurial spirit. However, not everything was rosy. After giving birth, she struggled with postpartum depression, which worsened when Michael faced career difficulties. Their marriage began to strain, with David witnessing the tension between Sonia and Michael. To clear her mind, Sonia took Sasha and moved to Carmel, a picturesque community in Northern California known for its white sandy beaches, artistic vibe, and stunning views. Although Sonia had not yet made any drastic decisions about her marriage, she considered divorce. In Carmel, her long hair, striking beauty, and charisma made her a well-known figure. She also became notable for driving a Mercedes-Benz convertible. Her career took a positive turn when she became a rising star at Levi Strauss, working as a sales representative. In Carmel, Sonia formed a genuine friendship with another young mother, Caroline McBride. Their daughters attended the same school, which promoted children's freedom and creativity. This nurturing environment allowed Sasha and her friend to grow up happily. Around this time, a new family moved in across the street from Sonia and Sasha. The family consisted of Jean and Walter and their son, Michael Scott, known as Scott. Scott, 25, was studying photography at the Monterey Peninsula Community College. His volatile personality and poor manners made him a notorious figure in the neighborhood. Despite having no known criminal record, Scott was an odd and intimidating character with limited social aspirations. While Sonia was regaining control of her life and progressing steadily, some unsettling events began to occur. Caroline recounted that she received several mysterious phone calls with no one on the other end. Sonia also felt that she was being watched. One night in mid-September 1981, Caroline was visiting Sonia when they heard heavy footsteps outside the window. According to Caroline, Sonia did not know her neighbor Scott. While the subsequent investigation could not definitively link Scott to the phone calls or the strange occurrence in the garden, the later events strongly suggested his involvement. In the early hours of Thursday, October 15, 1981, Sonia dropped Sasha off at school and then returned home. It was then that Scott broke into her house. He managed to subdue her. The young mother, only 30 years old, fought valiantly against her attacker. Unfortunately, Scott overpowered her and soon assaulted her. Using Sonia's own stockings, he strangled her and fled the scene. Around midday, Caroline knocked on her friend's door multiple times. Worried by the lack of response, she opened the door and what she found would be etched into her memory forever. Just a few feet from the living room, she saw Sonia's partially clothed body on the floor, stockings tightly wrapped around her neck. Her purse was nearby, its contents scattered on the floor. Caroline got into her car and drove through the neighborhood, screaming for help, thinking the attacker might still be inside Sonia's house. Emergency services contacted the county sheriff's department, and Detective Williams was one of the first to arrive at the scene. Along with obvious signs of forced entry and struggle, the detective noted a significant detail on the victim's body, a broken ring fingernail, suggesting she had scratched her attacker. Initially, the detective could not identify the object around her neck, but later realized they were stockings. Detective Williams then interviewed Caroline, and immediately a suspect emerged. The detective quickly reached out to Michael Stone, informing him that he was the prime suspect without disclosing details. Unaware of the reason for police interest, Michael hurried to the station. He was told the terrible news upon arrival. Despite being cooperative, Michael's status as Sonia's ex-husband made him a natural suspect. However, William soon realized that pursuing this lead solely based on their relationship was unwise. News of the crime quickly spread through the community. Initially, residents of the picturesque coastal town were in disbelief, but soon a profound fear took hold. In a place where such a crime seemed unthinkable, trust among neighbors eroded. Detective Williams continued his investigation, which led him to focus on Sonia's neighbor, Scott. He approached Scott, who was injured, and claimed his injury was self-inflicted while cutting acrylic sheets in his backyard. Throughout the conversation, the officer noticed Scott's nervousness, stammering, and mumbling. These observations led the detective to consider Scott a potential suspect. These initial impressions were documented in an official report, which also included opinions gathered from interviewing various neighbors. When police spoke to Scott's parents, they learned he had given them a completely different explanation for his injury, claiming it resulted from a fight at school. To verify Scott's story, the police examined his workbench and the acrylic sheets, but found no bloodstains. When they interviewed one of his friends named Michelle, she initially said that Scott mentioned getting the scratch in an argument. Later, however, she confessed that Scott admitted being at the crime scene that morning. As authorities built their case against the prime suspect, Sonia's loved ones bid her a final farewell. The tragic actions of Scott left young Sasha bearing an unbearable burden. She suffered from night terrors and traumatic nightmares, often seeing herself as Little Red Riding Hood chased by a terrifying wolf. She would wake up screaming every night. On Monday, December 19, 1981, Scott was arrested at a traffic light for 2 outstanding speeding tickets. A detective from the Monterey County Sheriff's Office in California approached Scott's vehicle with a warrant for his DNA. Although Scott requested to speak with a lawyer, he denied him this right. This marked the beginning of several errors that negatively impacted the case. Once at the station, Scott was booked, fingerprinted, and photographed, with the police aiming to capture an image of the cut on his cheek. They proceeded to interrogate him about Sonia's murder, which was legally questionable. During the interrogation, Scott claimed he had an affair with Sonia and was at her house the day of the crime but denied any involvement in the fatal attack. Additionally, after typing up the interview reports, investigators destroyed the original case notes. With the interrogation report in hand, the deputy district attorney noted inconsistencies in Scott's account. Scott was subjected to a polygraph test and failed. At that time, DNA evidence as we know it today did not exist. The samples collected at the crime scene only allowed for blood type and other genetic markers to be identified. The tissue found under Sonia's broken nail revealed a blood type that did not match Michael's, her ex-husband. Soon after, Scott was charged with first-degree murder. Initially, Scott's trial was scheduled to begin on March 7, 1982, but repeated delays pushed it to November of the same year. One of the first to testify was a forensic serologist, an expert in biological fluids, who examined blood, semen, and urine from both the victim and the accused. He testified there was no evidence of sexual assault on Sonia's body. Next, the chief forensic pathologist from San Francisco and an expert in reconstructing sexual assault scenes stated that the evidence of such an assault did exist, particularly noting the bruises on Sonia's body. Michelle Wilson, Scott's close friend, testified for the prosecution. However, her testimony was confusing as she retracted her earlier statements, denying what she had allegedly said Scott had told her about that day. Michelle admitted that the passage of time had made her unsure about the events, leading to her being reprimanded during the following day's proceedings. On November 13, 1982, Scott's parents denied seeing a scratch on their son's face. Meanwhile, some witnesses placed Scott near Sonia's home, and the prosecution insisted the scratch on his face resulted from a struggle with Sonia. When the defense attorney requested additional time to review witness statements, the trial was further delayed, leaving the year 1982 to end without resolution. In April 1983, the defense moved to dismiss the murder charges against Scott, which the judge denied. However, the judge expressed doubts about Scott's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. On June 20, 1983, the judge criticized the investigators' procedures as unethical and illegal, pointing out that Scott was interrogated while in a psychologically weakened state. Consequently, he dismissed the murder charges against Scott. This was a significant blow to both the prosecutor and the police team. Scott seemed to have gotten away with it, but his relief was short-lived as he was brought to trial again in August 1983. As expected, he pleaded not guilty. 2 months later, the case was impacted once more by the initial haste of the police, who had interrogated Scott without honoring his request to speak with a lawyer. This time, a judge from the Montgomery County Superior Court invalidated the evidence obtained during Scott's arrest and interrogation, deeming it illegal. This allowed the defense to argue that their client had been harmed by what they called tainted evidence. During the hearing on November 17, 1983, neighbors provided varying accounts of Scott's whereabouts that day. An emergency physician from the local hospital testified that the laceration on Scott's face was consistent with a scratch from a fingernail. The credibility of the witnesses' reports negatively impacted the prosecution's case. Compounding the issue was the fact that the investigators' original notes had been destroyed. There was no way to verify what was said and what the officer had noted, making it impossible to contrast with the typewritten statements. The defense attorney pointed out discrepancies between the typewritten statements and the witnesses' testimonies on the stand. On November 24, 1983, Scott claimed he had been playing softball the day of the crime. Apparently, none of his softball teammates were contacted. 2 weeks later, when the jury failed to reach a unanimous verdict, the judge declared a mistrial. Scott, visibly relieved, spoke to the press outside the courthouse, stating that he was not surprised by the decision as he had always maintained his innocence and felt he had been falsely accused. Following the 2 judicial setbacks, the prosecutors dismissed the case, concluding that the available evidence was insufficient for a conviction. Scott then lived as a free man, finding work as a forklift operator for a well-known American retailer of tools and home goods. In 2007, he also secured employment as a school bus driver for the Salinas Unified School District. Simultaneously, he coached Little League Baseball, earning the affection of both the children and their parents. He continued living in the area, becoming a father and grandfather, and was never accused of another crime. In stark contrast, Michael, Sonia's ex-husband, became the focus of public suspicion in the absence of a convicted culprit. This scrutiny led Michael to leave the country and move to Canada. As Sasha grew older and fully understood the events, her anger grew, a rage fueled by the lack of answers and the fact that her mother's killer had never been caught. As a teenager, she turned to the detective in charge of the case, seeking to understand why the investigation wasn't reopened. Beyond emotional support and explanations related to bureaucracy and the law, he couldn't do much more for her. Resolving to ensure her mother's crime was not forgotten, Sasha channeled her energy into advocating for victims, dedicating herself to restorative justice, an approach that encourages offenders to take responsibility and recognize the harm they've caused through discussions with victims and community members. This work brought her immense satisfaction and allowed her to demonstrate great professionalism. In 2009, a significant event brought new hope for justice for Sonia. With the detective of the case retired, a new detective was assigned to the case. By then, investigators had a tool unavailable in the 1980s: DNA testing. The following year, a forensic expert from the California Department of Justice began testing old samples, including the blood found under Sonia's nails. The sample yielded a male DNA profile. The goal was to compare it with a sample of Scott's DNA, stored in small vials for nearly 30 years. However, at some point over the years, these vials had broken, spilling their contents into the envelope containing Sonia's nails. The material was so severely degraded that they could only generate a weak male profile from it. Although he believed Scott was the suspect, he wasn't entirely certain. To confirm this, they needed a new DNA sample from Scott. Lacking the necessary funds and resources, the county sheriff's office couldn't obtain it, and the case was shelved again in 2013. Many years passed without any progress until late 2020, when the county district attorney formed a task force focused on dozens of cold cases with available DNA evidence. A new detective was assigned to revisit Sonia's case. He dove into the old files and consulted past detectives to discuss the details. The deputy district attorney then collaborated with the detectives to re-examine all the evidence, deducing that some of it could now be tested with DNA technology that wasn't available when Scott was first tried. They discovered that Scott still lived and worked in the same county, and soon obtained a judge's order to collect his genetic material. The new DNA sample and the crime scene evidence were sent to the Department of Justice laboratory for analysis. The results revealed a conclusive match. Consequently, Scott, now 65 years old, was arrested at his home in Seaside and detained at the county jail on suspicion of murder. His bail was set at $1 million. The news shocked many residents, including students who had relied on his daily transportation services. The Salinas Unified School District faced scrutiny from anxious parents, understandably outraged that one of their bus drivers was allegedly involved in such a heinous crime. Swiftly, the district initiated the process to place Scott on administrative leave. Upon hearing of the arrest, Sasha, then 44 years old, was overwhelmed with happiness at the prospect of long-awaited justice. Scott's new trial began on January 30th, 2023. Although it was expected to last several weeks, it concluded in just 8 days, ample time for the defense to thoroughly cross-examine all witnesses. Scott's fate was sealed on Tuesday, February 7th, when, after nearly 6 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted him of first-degree murder. They also found true a special circumstance allegation that the crime occurred during the commission or attempted commission of a rape, making him eligible for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Victim impact statements included heartfelt words from Sasha and her father, Michael Stone, who spoke about how the crime had profoundly affected their lives. In April 2023, Sasha took the stage as an inspirational speaker at the National Crime Victims' Rights Week ceremony in Salinas, California. Speaking to a crowd that included many who had lost loved ones to violence, she painted a realistic picture of the impacts of trauma and violent crimes. Sasha emphasized that overcoming such devastation required developing inner strength, resilience, humility, compassion, grace, generosity, and forgiveness. She concluded her speech by paying special tribute to her mother, who remained her motivation for her work. 2 months later, on June 12, 2023, Michael Scott, 67, was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for the 1981 murder of 30-year-old Sonia Carmen Herock. Although the detectives never had the chance to meet Sonia, finding her killer more than 4 decades later meant a great deal to them. As the first detective in charge of the case, he had wrestled with the ghosts of not strictly adhering to the law, feeling a debt to Sasha, whose pain had always stayed with him in some way. Now, he was certain he had done everything possible to deliver the justice Sasha so fervently sought. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.